Directions. Determine each type of question: prediction, inference, detail, big picture, or connection. Shade the question the correct color. Answer each question using complete sentences. This is The Telltale Heart, reimagined, or shortish story number 5. After the divorce, Tucker moved to an apartment downtown. There were only two good things about the place: it was cheap and it came furnished. Tom had gotten all the furniture in the settlement, and Tucker didn't even have a bed to sleep in. At least the move had been easy. 5 cardboard boxes with clothes and a few keepsakes, and he was done. That was a good thing. He hadn't slept in weeks. The stress of the breakup had him on edge all the time. He looked at his tired face in the bathroom mirror and thought, time to move forward. All right, pause for a minute. Let's answer some questions. Number 1, why does Tucker move into a new apartment? Number 2, what evidence from the first paragraph tells you that Tucker is struggling to cope with the breakup? But moving forward wasn't so easy. He missed Tom, he missed his old life, and he missed sleeping at night. The insomnia continued even after he'd been at the new apartment for a month. The old guy in the apartment above his didn't help. He stayed up all night, walking around the apartment. Just when Tucker thought he was about to drift off, he'd hear the footsteps again. Tucker tried talking to Mr. Jenkins a couple of times. The man had always said how sorry he was and promised to keep it down. The very next night, more footsteps, pacing, 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 until the sun came up. After a while, the old guy swore he'd been sitting in his recliner all night, specifically to be sure he wasn't keeping Tucker up. But Tucker knew this was a lie. He'd heard the footsteps, pacing, 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 all night long. The other neighbors swore they hadn't heard anything. They told the landlord that Tucker was lying. Mr. Jenkins was always quiet. They're all in on it, Tucker thought. Number 3. What is keeping Tucker awake at night? Number 4. When Tucker talks to the other neighbors about Mr. Jenkins making noise at night, what do they say? At the end of 3 months, Tucker was exhausted and desperate. At 2 o'clock one morning, he snapped. He ran up the stairs to Mr. Jenkins' door and pounded on it. Jenkins wouldn't answer. Trying the doorknob, Tucker found that the apartment wasn't locked. He barged inside. At first, he didn't see Jenkins. He went from room to room until he found him. The old man was lying in his bed, pretending to be asleep. This deceit was the final straw. Enraged, Tucker picked up the old man's cane left leaning against the nightstand. He brought it down hard on the old man's face. Over and over again he hit him. At first there were terrified cries, but those stopped after the first few blows. By the time Tucker had finished, nothing was recognizable about the old man's face except for a single staring blue eye. It stared at him accusingly. Tucker knew he should feel guilt about what he had done, but he only felt relief. Finally, the footsteps would stop. He laid down on the rug next to the bed. Within minutes, he was asleep. All right, let's pause to answer some questions. Number 5. What is Mr. Jenkins doing when Tucker sneaks into his apartment at night? Number 6. What does Tucker do to Mr. Jenkins? Number 7. Why do you think Tucker does this? The next morning, Tucker woke up refreshed. Looking at the dead man, he knew he had to do something about the body. He thought about dragging it out to his car and dumping it in the woods, but he knew he'd never be able to move the old man without the other neighbors seeing him. He thought about cutting the body up and taking it out in pieces, but that would make too much noise that the neighbors could hear. Noticing a loose floorboard, Tucker came up with a solution. Using a screwdriver he found in the kitchen, he pried up several floorboards in the bedroom. Being careful not to let the body thump onto the ground, He moved it to the opening. Squeezing the body between the floor joists was a challenge, but Tucker finally made it fit. The glassy blue eye stared at him. Tucker covered it with the man's bloody pajama top. He placed the cane and the bloody bed sheets inside the floor as well. Finally, he moved the floorboards back into position and covered them with the rug. Let's answer some questions. Number 8. What does Tucker do with Mr. Jenkins' body? Number 9. Do you think this is rational behavior? Why or why not? Tucker went downstairs, took a shower, and dressed for work. He had to be sure he went to the office, just like he always did. After work, he came home and ate leftover Chinese takeout. He watched an old movie on TV. At 10 o'clock, he climbed into bed and fell asleep. At 2 o'clock, Tucker was startled awake. He had been dreaming about the old man and his staring blue eye, but that wasn't what had woken him. The sound of footsteps from the apartment above him, pacing, 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 had jolted him awake. That's impossible, Tucker thought. Jenkins is dead. He turned over and closed his eyes. The footsteps stopped. Just as Tucker was about to fall asleep, it started again, pacing, pacing, pacing. He covered his head with the pillow, trying to drown out the sound. The footsteps only got louder. It was impossible to shut out the noise. This can't be happening, Tucker thought, but it was. Maybe if he went upstairs to Jenkins' apartment, it would stop. Climbing out of bed, Tucker quietly went up the stairs and let himself into the old man's apartment. He could hear the footsteps pacing, 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 but he could not find the old man. He opened every closet. He looked under the bed. He checked behind every curtain. Jenkins was not there, but the footsteps continued to grow louder. Covering his ears, Tucker screamed and screamed, trying to drown out the old man's footsteps. Hearing the screams, the neighbors ran to the apartment to see what had happened. "Call 911, a woman yelled. "I think he's having some kind of mental breakdown." Tucker was still screaming when the police arrived. He had to make the footsteps stop. Throwing back the bedroom rug, Tucker clawed at the loose floorboard until it came free. The old man's blue eyes stared up at him. The footsteps grew quiet, then finally stopped, as the police led Tucker away in handcuffs. All right, last couple of questions. Based on the final paragraphs of the story and earlier clues, what can you infer has happened with Tucker? Number 11. Do you think Mr. Jenkins really was pacing and making noise before he died? Why or why not? And let's go ahead and look at our writing prompt. Follow the steps below to write a paragraph on the following topic. Here's your topic. What events from the story allow the reader to infer that Tucker is having a mental breakdown? Write one sentence that states that the narrator, Tucker, is mentally ill and hallucinating. Write a second sentence that gives one piece of text evidence that supports your inference. Write a third sentence that explains why the evidence you chose proves that your inference is correct. Write a fourth sentence that gives another piece of text evidence that supports your inference. Write a fifth sentence that explains why the second piece of evidence you chose proves that your inference is correct.